The OnePlus Open has a 4800 mAh battery and a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. These two specs let me think that the phone actually has a chance of lasting a full day without having to recharge. Will the OnePlus Open be the first foldable phone to last me a full day? Stick to the end to find out. Before we get started with the details of my day, remember that leaving a like and subscribing will really help this channel out. Now let's get started. So far, the Pixel Fold and the Z Fold 5 have gone through the test, but neither of them made it. They did come pretty close, but still not quite enough to call it a full day's worth of battery. Especially with this test, which is a full day of heavy use and not light use. I feel like the other two foldables were missing something. For example, the Pixel Fold was missing a more efficient chipset, even though it had the same size battery. And the Z Fold 5, even though it had the same chipset, had a smaller battery. The OnePlus Open basically got the best of the other two phones and put them into one package, and that's why I believe it actually has a chance to make it a full day. As per usual, I unplugged the phone at 8 a.m. and from then on, it basically has to last me till 11 p.m. for me to consider it a full day. The first thing I did was to check my email, and obviously I'm going to open it to use the larger screen because that's going to give me the best viewing experience, and it's quite a big difference compared to a regular phone. Whether you keep it on the portrait mode or landscape, you get benefits either way. If you check your emails on portrait mode, you get a larger version of the email, but if you switch it to landscape mode, you get the split screen view. So with the split screen view, you get the inbox on one side and then you get the message on the other. So you can quickly check your messages without having to wait for the loading. It just pops up, and you can also scan through the rest of the emails to see what's next. Throughout the morning, I also watched about 1.5 hours of YouTube, and the viewing experience on this phone is just plain great. Using the larger screen is not always going to provide a larger viewing experience. It really depends on the type of content that you're watching. For example, if you're watching a video that's on a 2:1 aspect ratio, the large screen is not going to provide much of a benefit at all. Because most phones have something close to a 2:1 aspect ratio, those are going to provide a really good experience when watching videos of that sort. However, as the aspect ratio becomes more square, like 16:9, or especially a 4:3, the viewing experience is going to be a lot better on this large screen. What I like to do with the podcast type of videos is that I zoom in because they tend to keep the main focus on the center third of the screen, so you're not going to be missing out on much by zooming in. So while I was washing dishes, I did the tripod technique and I was able to watch the video without having to use a separate stand. And I feel like washing dishes really puts phones to the test, especially the speakers. Not every phone can provide high quality audio when you raise the volume after a certain point. But as I raised the volume on the OnePlus Open to be louder than the running water, I felt like the quality was great the entire way. And I was able to get some much needed entertainment while I was doing a boring chore. One great thing to point out is that when the OnePlus Open is in the half folded mode, because of the overall dimensions of the phone, it gives you basically a regular phone's aspect ratio when you're using this tent mode or folded mode, depending on how you like to use it. So because of the dimensions, you're not losing much screen real estate when you're doing the folded mode, which is awesome because not every phone gives you the same experience. I went for a walk around 1:30 in the afternoon, and at this point, the phone was at 80%. During the walk, I listened to some Spotify, took some pictures, and recorded some video. And by the end of the walk, the phone had gone down about 10% to 70%. This was all in about 40 minutes of walking and doing these tasks. But I'm not surprised that the phone lost 10% during this time because taking pictures and recording video in 4K 60 frames per second really does drain the battery pretty quick. So by the time I got back with 70%, I had completed about 1.5 hours of watching YouTube, 40 minutes of Spotify, and about half the videos and pictures that I needed for the minimum tasks. So overall, it's doing pretty good in my book. One thing that I have to mention that I didn't really experience too much with the other phones is that during the first 1.5 hours of YouTube, since I'm not on Wi-Fi, the phone struggled a bit to keep a good stream going. It often had to stop to buffer and the quality wasn't really going too high either. Of course, I also have to mention that as soon as I step out, the signals picks up really quick and everything works flawlessly. So it's really an inside of the building type of thing that I experience this with. So I continue to work on the minimum task and continue on with my day-to-day tasks. And the phone finally reached 50% a little after 4 in the afternoon. At this point, I completed my YouTube and my Spotify, so I'm just missing an hour of Netflix and a little less than half of my photos and videos. So I'm feeling pretty good about the phone lasting me all day. Unfortunately, for the OnePlus Open, there was still a pretty big challenge coming up ahead because I needed to use the GPS and it was going to take about 2 hours. And of course, I wasn't going to be able to plug it into a charger during that time. So that was going to put a big strain on the battery for the OnePlus Open. What I did to save some battery is that I turned the screen off for most of the trip. I'm pretty sure that if I went 2 hours with the screen on the entire time, the phone would have made it. I think the only phones that really have a chance of making it with that is the OnePlus 12, the S24 Ultra, and maybe the Z60 Ultra from Nubia. By the time I got to my destination, there was still a pretty good amount of battery left, and I was able to finish watching Netflix and taking the rest of the photos and videos. And finally, the phone reached 20% at 8:40 p.m., and I was feeling pretty confident that the phone was going to last me the rest of the day. But I didn't want to get my hopes up too much because I was in a similar point with the Z Fold 5, but then Samsung software looks like it kind of changes the way the battery measuring goes, and it dropped a lot faster in the last 20% than before that. Since all of my minimum tasks were completed, I didn't have to do anything too strenuous except just use the phone like normal to answer messages and do my other things until the end of the day. And luckily enough, at 11 p.m., which I consider to be the end of the day, the phone still had 7% battery remaining. So it still had 2 percentage points to go before being considered a fail, which is kind of close, but it had a little bit of a buffer left. But the important thing to note here is that the OnePlus Open is the first foldable to make it a full day and on my leaderboard. My experience the other day was great. The OnePlus Open's large screen and anti-reflective screen protector provided the best viewing experience I could ask for. And at least for the time being, the OnePlus Open has the best battery performance from any of the foldables I've tested. The only downside that I experienced with the OnePlus Open was the inconsistent streaming with YouTube. And that's pretty much probably because I'm in a concrete building and that disrupts the signal. But either way, it was worse than the other ones that I've tried. So best to use Wi-Fi, I guess, to counteract that. I still want to call it a deal breaker, especially for me because I use Wi-Fi whenever I'm indoors, and you're not going to have that issue with Wi-Fi. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video helpful, and if you did, please remember to leave a like. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.